And now we are live. Hello and welcome again to our user group, Sitecore User Group Ecuador. Today we will have two cool topics that I will personally think for frontends will like it. One is about a new approach in development of Sitecore connected single-page application, progressive web applications, and web applications using the JavaScript Sitecore services. This will be presented by Artsem and Ihar from Belarus. Um, then we will watch the great capabilities of Feydra, which is a Sitecore front-end development tool presented by Una. I will let them introduce themselves, so let's start. And go, Artsem, enjoy.
So, hi everyone. Today we are going to speak about Sitecore JSS and a few words about us. So, my name is Artyom. I'm lead Sitecore developer. I'm Sitecore MVP, and currently I'm working at Brimit. We are from Minsk.
Yeah, also, my name is Igor. I'm lead front-end developer and also working for Brimit.
So,
could you share your screen, please? It's not.
Oh, so. Okay, do you see my screen now?
Yes.
Some connection issues. Just a second. Is it okay? So.
Yeah, we can see it now.
Okay. So before start talking about JSS, sorry. One thing. Just a second. Sorry, I'm a bit confused with my slides. Okay. So before I start talking about JSS, I should mention a bit about headless approach. So headless is an architecture that allow us to physically decouple in creation and organization of content, delivery of content and presentation to one or more channels, and the rendering of the content and presentation on the one or multiple devices. So what does it mean? Some of us probably implemented some solutions where we use maybe Sitecore service client, and then retrieving the data from the service, we render them on different devices, maybe using some JavaScript frameworks like React, Angular, and so on. And so it looks like a headless, but in this case, we can't use experience editor, we can't use content testing, and some other marketing tools is not available for us in this case. So in other words, headless CMS, it's a CMS without front-end rendering part. Yes, so this is a tool that we are missing when we tried to use Sitecore services that was provided before, but with JSS we have got an ability to use experience editor and other marketing tools. So what is JSS? Sitecore JavaScript Services is a toolkit for JavaScript developers, allowing to build full-fledged customer solutions like single-page applications, web applications, websites, and so on, using modern JavaScript libraries and frameworks like React.js and Angular, and being completely unplugged from Sitecore. Sitecore JavaScript Services was released along with Sitecore 9 on Sitecore Symposium and was introduced by Alex Shiba. So he also really helped us with preparing our presentation. He shared his slides with us, and some of them we are used on our slideshow. We have spent some time to research JavaScript services, and today we are going to describe what we are reached. We decided to implement our solution using Java JSS. There are two ways how we can do that. The first one is code first approach, and the second one is Sitecore first. So in case of using code first approach, a front-end developer works disconnected from Sitecore, and they define Sitecore information architecture via in-component definition and route the data. Sitecore information architecture, so it's a template for rendering content items and so on, is generated via the import process. The code first approach is good for smaller projects and temporary sites like campaigns. So it's good for front-end led projects and for micro apps within a larger site. So in case using Sitecore first approach, Sitecore information architecture are created by Sitecore developers, and import process is not utilized. Front-end developer works disconnected from Sitecore and creates components and mock root data based on the specification and contracts which was provided by Sitecore developer. So the first defined contract allow us to apply concurrent work. And Sitecore first approach is good for larger and complex projects, and good for organizations looking for control over the Sitecore information architecture. So the next thing that we want to describe is installation process. Igor will continue.
Yes, so to install JavaScript services from front-end perspective, first of all, you need to have a Node.js and Node Package Manager installed on your system. So the requirements are the following. It's Node.js of version 6.9 or above, and Node Package Manager version 5 or higher. Also, as NPM alternative, Yarn Package Manager also could be used. So then in terms, if you want to research JSS, I can recommend you to reach the original GitHub repository and download the advanced application on framework or library you are interested in. So it could be React.js, it could be Vue.js, or Angular, for example. So our choice was React.js. And also, if you want to create your own solution, you can use any of these sample project as initial boilerplate to develop your application. So to set up application, you need to run some commands in command line of Node Package Manager or in or in IDE in which you're working. It will be npm install, npm run setup, and npm run start to start working locally with your project.
So speaking about installation process in context of Sitecore, we need to install two Sitecore packages. We can download them from Sitecore site, and there is pretty simple, and we haven't got any troubles with this process. So the next thing that we are going to describe is application mods. JSS provides a list of application mods providing the flexibility for us. There is there is a long list of application mods. Some of them it's better for to use for development stage, and some of them good for production stage, but all of them characterized by two things. The first one is the place where rendering will be performed, and the second one is data provider.
So if we are talking about the different variations of application modes, we have two main parameters. The first one is the data source. So our application data could come from local JSON files, which will be represented in data folder, or it could be performed by the Sitecore layout service and come straight from Sitecore. Also, as you know, we have different types of rendering of our applications, so we can render it in browser. So it will be actually development mode, and actually we still can render it on server side to make probably our application more feasible for SEO optimization and retrieving asynchronous data more fast. So, and JavaScript services application modes are combinations of these two main parameters. As you can see, we have different combinations of it. So that's it.
Let's move to the next slide. This diagram is represented high-level structure of GSS and data flow, and we can see that so GSS based on the list of services like layout service, content service, dictionary service. Also, we can see the two additional services like Sitecore ship and import service. I separated them because they don't they don't take a part of rendering process. These services used for import our changes to Sitecore, and also we can see that so we can send a browser, and there is a flow of data, and we can see that the HTML is always coming from Node.js. It's can be Node.js server, or it can be Node.js view engine, which Sitecore use for rendering components that was implemented in frontend on the frontend app. And we can see that the data for rendering is always coming from layout service. So layout service also used for so it's used in case of using Sitecore first approach, we can layout service is used for getting contracts from Sitecore, which was implemented by Sitecore developers. On this diagram also presented the content service and dictionary service. So it's a pretty simple services which provide data for translation, so the data from translation, and some common content for each pages. So the next. So now we will have a demo, where Ihar should show us the structure of front-end project.
Okay, so let's start. So currently, as I told before, we can perform NPM run start. And still, when our application is running, let's run through the application entire structure. So as we told before, we started with React.js based application. And here, actually in our demo folder, we can see our application structure. So, as we are talking about our demo, we used React.js as base application ecosystem. Also, we used React Redux State Manager. And as for additional libraries, we used React Redux Router to support route navigation and React Thunk for performing Redux store action and application side effects. Currently, if we look at this structure, we can see an assets folder which will contain media files and CSS. Also, we have a data about we had a few words before. So here, actually, we can see the data for the disconnected development mode, and it contains data source files. For example, for our routing, also we can see it has some JSON format about the component names, also placeholders and nested components. And also it will contain dictionary for the different language solutions. Also, it will contain the .sitecore JS files, which are necessary for manifest generation process, about which we will talk a little bit later. Currently, we have an internals folder, which will contain different application modes, about which we had a few words before. So let's run to the most interesting parts, is the source of our application. So in source file, we have an application entire structure. In boot folder, we have the default application settings, like initial state of our application, like the store initialization with different applied middlewares, loggers, and enhancers. Also, we have a root reducer, which is a combination of other reducers, and actually the root of our application, in which we define our translation provider and providing our application with Sitecore context, which is also a tool from Sitecore JSS. So, as for app folder, it has different reducers, actions, which are actually performing on the application level. So it fetching route data, dispatching different routes, and changing routes. Actually, we have a reducer, which will listen for these actions and perform different store changes. And if we're talking about components, we have different page types, like page for server rendering, entire point of our application, container in which we define dispatching our dispatches mapping to properties of our application, and actually the page which will contain a placeholder, which is also comes from Sitecore JSS. So furtherly, we have enhancers. So an enhancers folder contains higher order components like common actions, like common container, common component. So these tools allows us to share some common functionality between the existing components. Also, the next folder will be data provider. It has two providers for different modes, for development modes, in which we have data coming from local JSON files, and for production mode, in which data comes straight from Sitecore. So data provider methods allows us to get context, placeholder, and item data. Our folders like about and home will contain general components, which will be our roots in our application. And UI components will contain some our custom created components like sliders, articles, some links, images, etc., with its placeholders and field definitions required for manifest generation. Actually, let's take a look at our still empty application. As I told before, it has two main roots, which now are empty. Also, we have dictionary, which supports language changing, as you can see. And now let's fill our application with some prepared sample of data. So if we reload our application, we can see that we defined some kind of components like sliders, like some text, quick links for footer, and also some cards. Also, you can see that it still supports multi-language. And now actually we can take a look at our data structure. If you can see, we defined some components into our page placeholders. Like we have placeholder with name page header, and we nested a component with name hero image, which contains some kind of fields like images, ratios, some rich text, and some links. Also, I have a page content placeholder, which also has some nested components like article and card list, which also can use some custom field structure. So actually, all this data, it came from the layout service API. So, and there is actually two ways to get layout service, get Sitecore context from layout service. First one is in the level of our application. You can see the variable of Sitecore context, which will contain our context data. It's actually available on full application. And the second way is to this, most like the standard way for React Redux application, is mapping state to props. It's described in our custom main navigation. So if you can see, we mapped Sitecore context, navigation, item, into some navigation key. And furtherly, this parameter can be used through all our navigation. So also me and Artyom tried to get in touch with the content services, and first of all we created the footer links with the help of retrieving data from content service, but unfortunately it still has some troubles with serialization in Sitecore, so we returned to the layout service for the footer navigation too. So in terms of this application, we can easily add a new component with a similar way with already existing. Also, each component, when it's added, it should be described in component factory, first of all. And the second one, it should be described in UI components Sitecore. When we get manifest, when we have described name of the component, its display name, and necessary fields for it. So actually after that, we can add this component the way we like. We can add it through disconnected mode from local JSON files, as we already have in our dataset, or it can come through Sitecore. And about this, Artyom will speak a little bit later.
So I'm going to add a few words about the manifest generation process. So let me show where is project. Okay. Okay. So the Ihar showed us the component definitions, and I just want to show how we define a data structure. So, for example, the hero image component in the .sitecore.js file, we are defining a data structure, and we define the list of fields and their types, and based on this list, the data source template should be created in Sitecore for this component. It means when we added the component to the manifest file, we make sure that the hero image, so the rendering with name of with hero image name will be added to Sitecore, and the template with the following fields should be added to Sitecore, and this template will be used as a data source for the hero image component. So this data was wanted to add about generation process. So let's move forward, and so in the current slide we can see the list of features that I'm gonna to describe. Now I will shortly mention a few words about them, and then I will switch to the demo, and we will talk detailed about them. So let's go. So when we start to work on the JSS project, front-end developers implement some components, so some data structure and some. So they work in their project, in front-end project, and we will be able to deploy our changes to Sitecore. And there are a lot of commands which JSS provides for us. I only mentioned a few of them, the most recent, and sorry. And the first of them is deploy code first. Actually, using this command, the information architecture, its templates, renderings, placeholder settings, and content, and artifacts like CSS files, JS files, images, fonts, and other JavaScript stuff and front-end stuff will be deployed to Sitecore solution. Also, we are able to deploy it separately. We can use the command deploy code first items only. It means that only Sitecore information architecture will be deployed, and we also can use deploy Sitecore first or deploy code first files only commands, which allow us to deploy only artifacts. Let's imagine that we are starting to work on Sitecore, so on the JSS project. We deployed our changes to Sitecore, and some content editors started to work on the content. And in this case, if we utilize the deploy code first command, all content will be overridden. And JSS provide an ability to avoid that, and we can use the command like deploy code first no content. It means that only rendering, only templates and placeholder settings, so the developer stuff, will be deployed to Sitecore. Also, there are content workflow provided, and developer override state of this workflow also allow us to prevent content overriding. I will show you how it works at demo time. So layout service. In my point of view, the layout service is one fundamental thing in JSS. It doesn't matter which way you render your application and which library or frameworks you use for it. Layout service support all of them. And using layout service, we can receive content of item. Previously, we have already had an ability to obtain content by, for example, Sitecore service client. But layout service also allows us to retrieve the presentation data with applied personalization rules, tracking goals, and other marketing features. So there is image of a part of layout service output. I will show detail in demo time. Okay, so the one part of layout service output is context. So it's object which provide common data for each request to layout service. So this is represent a Sitecore context object in Sitecore backend development process. So there is a flag is at page editing mode. So there is some information about current user, about site, and so on. Also, so we have ability to extend this information, extend this object. So it's useful for providing data for Sitecore placed components on the page that not managed through the placeholder and Sitecore layout, such as a header and footer navigation. So the next thing is customizing rendering initialization in the layout service. So layout service provide the data of each rendering that assigned to the requested item. By default, the layout service populates the rendering content object with a fields of rendering data source item. But sometimes we need to output something else, such as data from different items. So it's maybe non-item data, such as information from XDB or XConnect currently. it can be calculated or more complex value. Actually, we are able to override this contents object. I will show you later how we can do that. Speaking about multi-language and multi-sites, so JSS also supports them. So Ihar showed how multi-languages worked, and there is a dictionary service which help us with implementing multi-language solution, and multi-sites also support it, but we need to create separate front-end projects for achieve multi-sites approach. So each front-end project will represent a different site in Sitecore. A few words about dictionary service. It's just a REST endpoint which provide phrases from dictionary. We can define a dictionary for each site, or we can use default Sitecore dictionary folder, which located in system under the system item. So the content service is allow us to retrieve the data. It's a common data for some components. So this service is temporary, and currently Sitecore JSS team works on the in-depth integration with Sitecore service client for retrieving this data. And JSS content service will not be supported in the future. Okay, let's move to the demo. So actually, let me prepare a bit. And let's start with Sitecore structure. Okay. So when we utilize the import process, the list of items will be created in Sitecore. So if we go into templates, we can see that the own templates folder should be created for each application. So in our case, there are two JSS application. It's JSS Advanced App and Brevet JSS app. So the JSS Advanced App is represented an example which provided by JSS team, and Brevet JSS app, it's application that we have implemented with Ihar. So it's templates which will be used as a data source, and I showed it for you in our front-end project. So for comparing, we can see that there is an image ratio and title, body, link fields, and the same fields are presented in Sitecore after utilized import process. So the rendering also will be was created in Sitecore. So the rendering represented our components. Also, we can see that data source template was automatically defined and set. Also, data source location was set for each component. Let's move. Placeholder settings also were created and define the components which can be used with this placeholder. and content items. So the content items are created based on the routes that defined in frontend project. So we have two pages. It's home and about. So we can see two pages. Okay. So I was talked about a workflow which we can use for prevent content overriding. Each item that was created by import process has assigned the JSS workflow, and when we by default, sorry, just a second. So by default, the item has development mode state. It means that this item will be overridden due the import process. But when we change something in this item, or when we click on the to content mode button, this item should be moved to content mode. Yeah, we can see that currently item in content mode, and it means that this item will be skipped due import process and will not be overridden. It will allow us to prevent content overriding and make sure that our content editors will be happy. Also, I want to share that the personalization works. So I assigned a pretty simple personalization rule for the hero image. So the rule is where the current user is anonymous, and when we go to the home page, we can see the red car, and this user is not anonymous because we are logged in Sitecore. And when we go to the let's create a new private window for making sure that we are. And when we go to the new browser, we can see that the other car. It means that personalization works with Sitecore, or with JSS, sorry. Experience editor. Takes some time for loading. Okay. Oh. Okay. I suggest to move to the layout service. I will show you the output of layout service while it's loading. So let's see which information which so let's see which information are provided by layout service. Currently, we can see the context object there. I described it before. And there is some common information. There is a name and display name of current item. There is a fields of current item. So there is database name, template, layout ID, and so on. And there is a placeholder object which represent a list of placeholders. So we can the main placeholder first. In this placeholder, we have put the home component, which don't have any data source, and the contents object is empty. Also, the home component has two placeholders. It's page header and page content. In the page header, we have put the her image component, and this component has data source item which has 5 fields, and we can use them for retrieve the data from data source item and render it. So we have all structure of item, including the placeholders, including the renderings that assigned to this item, and including the data which related with the rendering. Okay, there is an output of dictionary service. It's pretty simple. We should set the app name, we should set the language, and APK. APK is required for each request to the JSS API. Also, there is a content service. There is an item path, which we should set, and we try to get the footer navigation using this service. It's footer navigation placed under the content folder. It contains the 3 links, but unfortunately this doesn't work because the content service should also output the children's of requested item, but JSS has an issue with serialization of children, and actually it doesn't work and should be fixed maybe in the future. So let's move to the experience editor. Actually, it's typical page with some fields, and we can manage all texts and images there. Let's save. And see that experience editor works. You can change the language. Okay, and let's move to the backend part. I want to show how we can extend context object of layout service. We have provided an example for footer navigation because we was not able to retrieve the source for our footer navigation from content service due to content service has an issue with that. We extended our context object of layout service. For extending our layout service, we need to implement JSS get layout service context processor. We need to inherit our class from this processor and should override the doProcess method. There is some logic how we retrieve the data from Sitecore. It's pretty simple and typical for Sitecore. And then we need to extend, we need to add the context data. It's just the string key and our data, and it should be automatically serialized to our output. I have added just 2 additional fields like security info, which contains this data about this user is anonymous and current user name, just for example. Also, we can update, we can change a logic of serializing rendering data. As I showed, each rendering has so the object of our rendering in layout service has the fields of has the contents object which present a list of fields of data source item. We can change them. We can change this logic. Currently, JSS provided a list of predefined rendering modes. Content resolvers. The default is data source resolver. Also, there is some examples of use of them. So also I have added the custom content resolver. We just need to.
Hey, Artem, if you can accelerate a little bit, because we have another presentation.
Okay, sure.
Thank you.
I'm close to finish. Okay, so we have a content resolver, and then we can choose the content resolver for the component. There is a layout service section, and there we can choose the content resolver, and depending of which content resolver is selected, the content object of layout service output will be changed. So it was the last thing that I was going to describe during the demo, and let's move to our conclusion. So in conclusion, I want to say that it is really exciting experience for me. The technology is very promising, but not so simple in use, at least for backend developers. And there is a bit difficult structure front-end projects, the structure of front-end project, and it was difficult for me to figure out how to work there. So I enjoy getting to know it, and I hope in the future I will have another opportunity to use JSS in a real project. And a few words from Igor.
Yes, so at the end of our presentation, I'd like also to add a few words. So that was a really exciting experience, and as for my opinion, JSS offers a unique opportunity for both backend and front-end developers to create good, flexible, and extendable single page or progressive page application connected with Sitecore using different ways of development, for example, code first or Sitecore first. So this is a very good experience, and it discovers a lot of opportunities for creating different pretty boilerplates or completed UI libraries of elements, which also can make application more simple and more flexible. So actually, thanks for your attention.
Yeah, really interesting. this session. Yeah, a lot of helpful information, and thank you guys for the presentation. And I guess if someone wants to start working with GSS, I think the best recommendation should be to visit the gss.sitecore.net site and start with that. Thank you guys. So let's move on with Una presentation. Una, you ready?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, I am. Thanks.
Thank
I'll
you.
share my screen now. Okay. Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. My name is Una Verhoeven. I'm a senior solution developer at Hedgehog, and I'm Sitecore MVP for 2018. Today's talk is going to be about the Feydra, which is the Hedgehog's product tool for the front-enders. And because it is a tool for the front-enders, we usually call it a tool for the forgotten Sitecore developers. Before we dive into the Feydra, I would like to remind you all and to invite you for the Sitecore User Group Conference in Europe in 2018. The Sitecore User Group brings the development community together and provides the perfect platform to gain knowledge and get inspired by the potentials within Sitecore, Sitecore Commerce, and more. And it's all about what you can do with the Sitecore now. All content is selected by the Sitecore User Group community organization team, and sessions will include community speakers, but also the speakers from Sitecore. It will be held on 23rd and 24th in Berlin, and today is actually the last day for early birds, so go and get your tickets. So now back to the Feydra. So what we're going to cover in this session is what problem does Feydra solve? How does it work? I will be showing you a demo of Feydra. I'm actually using Mac for this presentation because most of the front-enders actually do work with Mac. And also no one can say that they have a Sitecore running on this machine. And I will show you how the development process has changed and how it has been improved thanks to Feydra. So let's discuss now about the processes. So what usually happens when we get a Sitecore project? Every Sitecore project always starts first with a design. So first we actually have the UX team, which is going to map out the entire website and is going to hand it over to the design team, who is going to create the PSD files or in something else. When they're done with that, all those files are going to be handed over to the front-ender. So for all of this time, all this process is being taken in place. Usually what happens is either Sitecore developers are setting up their solution and just making the initial base of it, but most of the times it's waiting. But then what happens? The front-ender gets all the designs, and now it needs to create all the HTML, CSS, and JavaScript files. So basically, the front-end is cutting up all those chunks. Preferably, it's actually working with the Sitecore developer to discuss in which blocks those chunks are going to be sketched. It quite frequently creates a static version of the website, and it's going to commit it in the source control. And when all of that is done, those files are being handed over to the backend developer, which is the Sitecore dev. So actually now, the Sitecore developer can start working on it. So it was going to take all those static assets. So you're going to open it, you're going to split it into the different view files, so the different CSS/HTML files. You're going to copy all those assets, the CSS and the JS files. So basically, you're kind of doing the work which front-ender has done. Of course, it has been delivered to you, but you still need to deal with that, so you just can't start to do your code. And after all of that is done, that code gets checked in the source control. And of course, we have the source control. At some time, if we have all the processes ready and set, the build processes and the continuous integration, the code is getting built, preferably on the QA server. And once when all of this is done, the front-ender is actually being able for the first time to see their changes and their actual implementation with the Sitecore on QA. So let's discuss about the process. So well, first we had the UX and design, which delivered the things to the front end. Front end has chucked all those pieces into HTML and CSS. It went back to the back end. It got again split into different parts, got committed to the source control, and appeared on QA. So basically what happens here is if there is some kind of a mistake or some code change that needs to happen, we need, again, to deliver certain things to the front-ender, then they need to make those changes locally, check them in, or hand them over to the backend developer, and the same process goes over and over again. So what we notice here is that a lot of time has been lost. Also, what you need to keep in mind that a lot of front-enders do not work with Visual Studio. Some agencies do have them, but front-enders, it's not expected from them to know how to work in Visual Studio. So what is the cost of the method 1? It takes a lot of time for the backend developer, for the Sitecore developer, to actually migrate the static code. So instead of you spending time of building the .NET code, every time you get something delivered from the front ender, you need to stop with what you're doing, split that code, and check it in. The front ender is again waiting. It takes time to reproduce the issues which have appeared or some code changes. But also, front-ender cannot test if something gets broken in Sitecore. So think of the experience editor. Because experience editor uses the same class names as normally front-end developers do use them, very often what will happen is that experience editor, sometimes the ribbon would get broken, sometimes certain things are not visible, or the dropdown gets broken. So we did a little calculation with this kind of process, and we took a 3-month project example. And we took a simple project, so with ongoing fixes and migrations. It takes approximately 13 days of developers' work. So just with the migration, fixes, delivery to the front end, merge it back to the source control, etc. So if you count it money-wise, this is actually very expensive. And then of course, the developer at one moment is going to get frustrated, and he or she's going to say, okay, do your own work. So instead of me constantly copy-pasting your changes into my views, here is the access to the source files, and you do those changes manually. And the front end says, okay, fine, I'm just going to do them. But then we come into another issue. Front-ender needs a Sitecore on their machine. So they need to be in Windows, they need to have IIS, they need to have SQL. Nowadays, if you're on Sitecore 9, they need to have Solr as well and install it with CIF. And they should develop everything with Visual Studio. So normally, front-enders do not have any idea what we are talking about, and especially if you're working with a third-party agency, which is something which quite frequently happens. And even if you do have front-enders in the house, quite frequently they are very booked, and they don't have time to jump in between the projects. So in order for front-end to set up everything and to start working on, they need to have Sitecore, Windows, Visual Studio, etc. But they also need licenses for all of this. So we end up with having an overhead of the tools and processes that they actually do not use. So what we get with this second approach is that, for example, the overhead is 5 days in a 3-month project example. The front-ender is very frustrated at this point because they will need to deal with a certain code which they're going to see in the view which comes from Sitecore that we are using. Think about certain fields from the models which are being displayed, and they don't know that kind of code. And also, it's really not expected from the front-enders to deal with this. They want to set up their own stuff and actually to build and deploy their own way. So in order for the front-end developer to do development, they need to work like the back-end developers. They need to deploy with the same tools as we are working on. And the biggest insult for them is to be on Windows, because most of them are Mac, to use the tools that they don't know or they don't like. And mostly what they will say to them, but why can't I just set up my own build and my own things? And this is where Feydra comes in place, and we call it the front-end Hydra. It is the silver bullet tool for the front-end developers on Sitecore. With Feydra, you do not have any more asset handover, and you are not required to work with Windows or Visual Studio, nothing. It's completely up to you how you're going to set up your machine and to start working on it. So how does Feydra work? The only thing which is required for Feydra is that there is some kind of a shared instance running on a network share. So for example, that can be even a test server, it can be a QA server. You only need a place where front-enders are going to have a shared source. Each frontender then copies their changes into their own drop location on the shared instance. And thanks to that, they're going to be able to see their changes immediately, but without committing their changes to the source control. So you're going to avoid all of that application pull recycle and so on. So less talking, more demoing. As you can see already here, I'm on Mac. So this is the solution which has been set on Azure. So this is the demo that we're using. It is the launch Sitecore website. So this is the default one. So what happens when you install Feydra? In order to access to it, you just need to type in the Feydra into the URL, and then you're going to get the control panel. So the first thing that you need to do, you have the licenses here. You need to add your licenses. And after that, you need to add users. In this case, these are going to be your front-end users. Feydra can be installed either with a NuGet package, or it can just be installed manually. It has two DLLs, one for Sitecore if the front-ender works with the solution. Otherwise, it is just one DLL deployed, for example, on the QA server, and one config file. When Feydra gets installed, basically what it will do, I'm going to show how the FTP to the Azure looks. So this is my instance here. Let me try to maximize it a bit. So this is the www root of the Azure. So what does Feydra do? It's going to try to create the Feydra folder under the app data. If it's not able to do that, it's going to throw an error. So basically, Feydra does need to have access to this folder. It does need to have the right permissions. And also, it will create the Feydra root folder. Under the Feydra root folder, it's going to create the users. So if you can see here, I have default and I have my own user here. And if we compare that, what we have under the users, it's the same. So here you're going to add your front-end users. So what do these users actually do? So the default one actually shows the default website. If I want to show my own change that I've done, I have here get activate link in order to see my change. I'm going to copy it. And let's open it in a new tab. And basically what Feydra does is activates the cookie. It picks up the files from the Feydra root folder under my user, and it's going to show me these changes. So for example, here I changed the header background to be orange. If I want to see how the default one looks, I'm going to go back to the control panel, or I can just delete my cookies. It depends. I'm going to here to get the link to be activated, and I'm going to paste it back here, how the default stuff looks. So where does this come very handy? There are several things. Number one is that front-enders can see their change immediately, and they don't need to hand it over to the backend developer. Second, they can actually see it, how it will look immediately in Sitecore. And the best part out of it all, it works in experience editors. So if they break something, for them, it's very easy to see what they need to change, because otherwise they need to have everything installed as a backend developer. Where does this feature also come handy? Let's take a look if you're working, for example, in an agile process, and you have the business owner, you have the product owner, and people want to see they have certain ideas, certain feature needs to be shown, and they want to get that displayed. So, for example, if you do a certain change, you're going to go to the control panel of Feydra, you're going to give them your Feydra link, and you're going to send them over for a review. So they can approve your changes without you actually committing the code. Where this is also handy is if you have a certain bug and you're not able to solve it, you can send it to a different front-end developer. And all of this is done without any source code change. So once you get all the approvals and the process right and the green light to go, you can then just commit your code and to continue working on. So how does this look? Let's, for example, create a new user. So let's call it Ecuador. It's not required for you to specify the first name and the last name, but username is required. And I'm going to press add user. So what this one does, it actually generates the folder under the Feydra root. So I'm going to go back on FTP to show you. Most probably I will need to disconnect from the FTP because unfortunately this one does not refresh it automatically. Yeah, I need to disconnect for a moment from the FTP and to re-log in back to Azure. So I'm going to copy my password, going back to FTP, reconnect. So here I'm going to go to the site, www.root, Feydra root, and as you can see, the SUG Ecuador has been created. By default, it creates the view folder for you together with the web config, but you can also specify different files and folders if that is necessary and required. In order to do that, there is a setting here. So you can say which folders you want to create, which files you want to copy, etc. You can create your own actions if it's needed. So we have created the SUG Ecuador user, so let's do some changes. I already have the repository on my machine, so I'm just going to open a text editor. So now you have several choices how you want to deploy these things. So we have created a gulp script, which basically what it does, it has several tasks which are basically watchers. The moment you change something into your source, that file is going to get committed into the Feydra root folder under your username. So basically what we're doing here is we're just checking for the CSS, JS, and CS HTML files, but you can also specify some other files if you have them, like SCSS, etc. So by having this in place, we also have gulp config. So I have my instance root. The Feydra user in this case is going to be SUG Ecuador. So this is my solution name, which I have already downloaded, and Azure host, username, and the password. Just a little note: when you're doing this kind of login, you need to have one more backslash, otherwise your user is not going to be recognized if you're doing it with a gulp. So I'm going now to save this, and I'm going to restart my watcher of the gulp script. So I have it here in my terminal. I'm going to stop it. And basically what I do here is I say gulp auto-publish assets to Azure. So now my gulp script is listening for the changes that I have under my folders. So basically this is my repository in which I'm going to work on. So let's do some changes. I have here a header open and I have a carousel that I want to change. So because I'm not a front-ender, I'm not going to play around too much. I'm going to make simple changes. So let's say that I want to have the title changed on the carousel. Hello, Sitecore. And I'm going to save it. So what will happen now if I go back to my gulp script, you will see this part, publish file from my local system into the FTP. So here we're using FTP to Azure. If you don't want to use Azure, if you have on-premise, you can set up the same. It doesn't matter which server you have. The only thing is that this gulp script needs to have access to the actual file system where it needs to write to. So I have changed my carousel, and I want to change the header. So I'm going to say, OK, let's change the background color. It was purple, and we're going to say now yellow. Again, file save. The gulp script is listening in, so I change the header CSHTML, and it's going to get published. So let's now go back to the website. So this is how the site actually looks. This is the default one, the original. I'm now going to go back to the users panel. So SUG Ecuador, I'm going to get the link. I'm going to paste it here. So as you can see, it says activate this user. It takes a bit of a while. It's a single instance on Azure. And there it is, my change. Yes, the yellow is screaming, but here we see the hello Sitecore users from the view file that I have changed, and we also see the background color. So for example, let's say that you need to add more things so that you have a view file and you don't want to do those changes there, but you need to create the new stuff. Very simply, you can just extend the view file that you have to add different blocks and just note the backend developer that those changes are there, so they can just easily copy paste them into the separate view, because front-enders cannot create their own views and to get them in, because this is something that the Sitecore developer needs to do. So this is in a very simple way how you can see all of these changes. And what you need to keep in mind is this is only stored into the Feydra root folder. Nothing of this has been committed. So let's say that you have sent out this to someone. They say, OK, we're perfectly happy. Your changes have been approved. Then you can finally commit your source control, and you're going to see it the next day on your QA server. So let's now go back and deactivate the user. So let's go back to the default one. And this is the original site. So you are completely able to see all your changes, to do the styling, to create new blocks, to test it in Sitecore without actually having to commit anything to your code. So let's see how this would look actually in Sitecore. So I'm going to log in now. It takes always a bit of time when it's running the instance the first time. And while this is being worked on, I'm just going to reactivate this user so that when I open my experience editor, I have it already in place. While we're waiting for this, I'm going to show you how it looks now under the FTP. Of course, I need to copy my password again to reconnect. So the changes that I have done and what God script has done are now stored under Saga Ecuador views. And you can see here, it's not just that it copies the files, but it also picks their parent folder. So it is going to keep the structure the same as it is in your solution. So both carousel and header are in. Yeah, it takes time for Sitecore to start up.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, I will go back to this once it loads. I will continue my presentation, so instead of just waiting for Sitecore to load. So, but what are the changes that we've got with this? So the question is, what about the latest backend assets? So when the Sitecore developer changes something, we're going to see them. So of course, you're always going to need to wait the build and deploy on the QA. This is something that is inevitable, whether you're working even with having everything set on your local machine, you still need to wait for the backend developer to finish. So we would normally say that we have a night build and deploy, which is going to be delivered on the QA. So then the front-enders can pick up the new view files. But however you turn it around, for the new CSHTML files, you do need to wait for the Sitecore developer. But what we have got with this, so this is the old workflow that we were talking about in the beginning. So from the delivering the UX to splitting it, to the design, to the front end, splitting everything, back to the back end, again splitting the static content into the view, committing to the source control. Then we have build deploy, and then we see the first change on, for example, QA server. And at one moment, we again have the build and deploy, and that goes in production. Workflow with Feydra changes rapidly. So what we have here is, so what we can see as the benefits of Feydra is that this time, the backend developer is not interrupted. So front-ender does not need to come and say, okay, I have made this change, can you put this class in? So they can do that by themselves. And they know exactly how that is going to look on the actual Sitecore site. The front-end developers users tool they like. So like I'm demoing now, they can work from Mac, they can also work from Linux. If they want, they can work from Windows, but we are not blocking them that they need to have the entire Visual Studio and set up the SQL, the Solr, and everything that comes as a backend developer. And the most importantly is that the front-end developers can see their changes in Sitecore site immediately without actually being checked in and deployed. And they, with this approach, they can actually see if something gets broken in the experience editor, and they can very easily fix it instead of trying to reproduce it. So what about the pricing? The Feydra costs $299 per developer annually. There is also a free trial for 30 days for 5 developers. But this is something that can be addressed with the Hedgehog sales team. And if you count all the expenses which all the licenses cost with the MSDN licensing, yeah, it's much cheaper to have this than to actually try to get all the other subscriptions long term. So let's see, has Sitecore started, which would be really nice. Yes, it has. So let's go to the okay, this is in. It takes a bit of time. I'm just going to open it in a new window, it's faster.
Yeah.
I deliberately wanted to show you that it's on Azure and that it's deployed somewhere else. Because if this was being demoed from the Windows machine or something like that, you could always say, nah, it's just a trick. You're actually loading it from your local, but not like this. Okay, finally, we have Sitecore. I think that there is some issue with the browser because it's not picking up anything. Let me see which browser I'm using. It's Chrome, so that should be good. Yeah, let me just for the last try a different browser.
Yeah.
Because this, I think it's because of the Google Hangout that it's a bit lacking. So
right.
Let's try it in Safari. Oh, this one faster. Yeah, it works here. Okay, let's open the experience editor. And of course, I will need to paste the link with the SAG Ecuador being activated. So let's first give time for experience editor to load. In the meantime, I'm just going to copy the link from Feydra.
Is there any limit of users that you can manage?
Every license, for example, this one currently has 3 users. So if you go to the licenses here, it will say how many of them you can have. So it's for 5 users, this one.
Okay.
Okay, it's loading the experience editor.
In the meantime, we have a question.
Yeah.
Is Feydra worked fine with Sitecore 9 as well?
Yeah, actually, just last night we deployed it on Sitecore 9 update 1. So we tested it on all versions of 8. It works fine. And last night we deployed it to 9 update 1. So, sorry, 9 initial update 1. And it works just fine without any problems.
Great.
So while we're waiting for this, let me paste it. Yeah, this is one of those things you always wait for Experience Editor. While we're waiting for this, do you guys have any other questions?
Not now, but what should be the best approach to like install Feydra on QA server or something like that?
Well, you only basically need a server where front-enders can access to. That can also be the test server. So any server that you're deploying to, but that is not a production. So that is the only requirement. So is it a test or QA or acceptance or any other server in between? That's perfectly fine. So the only thing that they really need to have is one instance where they can actually deploy their files. So what is really necessary is that they have the permissions. So Feydra needs permissions to write on those files. So you can also just FTP directly to it, to the server, or you can create a link to the folder to the server, so you can map it. So it's completely up to either any of the developers to decide how they actually want to do this.
Okay.
So, and as I mentioned, it's just one DLL and one config, nothing more.
Great. And how the backend developer like gets notified that one file was changed, or how the front end can push these changes to the repo? Because
so basically with the gulp script, so here this is my change actually in Experience Editor finally. So you can see it because this is not original, this is not checked in. So basically it's all about the processes. When front-ender is done, so they have seen their changes, for example, how it looks here in Experience Editor, and once they're satisfied with their change, they're going to check it in the source control. So the moment it's checked in the source control, backend developer then is going to deploy it on the QA. As long as it is not in the source control, it's not going to end up on any other service, it's just going to be virtually accessible. So basically the process is, while the front-end developer is working on a certain changes, once he or she is happy with the changes, or for example needs approval from the product owner, and the product owner says, yes, I'm happy with what you have done, I want to have this on my website, then they check it in the source control.
okay, great.
Let me go back to the presentation. Yeah, this is basically it. This is the last slide. So if you want to get in contact and if you have any more feedbacks or any questions regarding the Feydra, this is how you can reach us. You can also follow us on Hedgehog Dev on Twitter. Guys reply very frequently. We're quite active. And that's it.
Okay, but what would be your recommendation if a developer wants to start working with it? What is the first step like?
You mean the front-end developer?
Yeah, exactly.
So the first step is set up your machine however you like it, and download the source control. So for example, here, I have opened the files which are actually, so all these files that I have opened here, the carousel, the custom, and the header, are actually my local folder, which is the Sitecore Launch TDS project. So this is my source repository, which can be the TFS, SVN, Git, it doesn't matter. So I picked one of these in which I need to work on. So for this case, I opened the Launch Sitecore MVC, and I opened from the navigation some CSHTML files and started working on them. So it completely is up to the front-ender how they want to set it up. So what is important that you download the actual repository in your machine, you need that anyhow in actual to start to work with it. So when you actually need to deliver certain changes and to see the previews, you're going to change your files here. And you can do that just in the static HTML. No one forbids you to open CSS.html file and to put static HTML there in order for you to see how it will look. And the moment you save it, for example, you can either manually copy it via FTP or you can use the script. This script is on our GitHub repository. And then you will be able to see your change. And then once you're done, so of course, what will happen with this, this file is going to get, if you're using TFS, it's going to be checked out. If you're using Git, it's going to be marked as modified. As long as you don't check it in, it's not going to end up on the QA or any other server. But you will be able to see what you're actually doing and on the actual site while being on Mac, for example, like I am, without checking in your code. So basically, you can preview your changes instead of you do a certain change. For example, if you give something like this to the front ender and they see these kind of things, they're going to ask, but what is this? This is not HTML. They don't know what this means, and it's not expected from them to know what this is or this, the entire razor syntax or the for loops, etc. So for them, this is a big issue, and for them, it's difficult to work in this. So they can just paste their static stuff here in order to see how it will look, or they can just say, okay, I understand now better how Sitecore works. So instead of having this class, I need to add a couple of more, and I'm going to adjust my CSS file, and I'm going to see how that looks without, because otherwise they're working blindly. If, let's say that they have changed something and they put, for example, some class here called test, and they create in their CSS file something with the test class. They can't see their change because they can't actually produce the carousel.cshtml on their local machine unless they have Sitecore running. And what very frequently happens is that they also need to deploy it, because not many of them actually copy-paste in the web root, and then you need to explain to them, that from the source control, you need to go to the web root, you need to find where the view folder is, etc. With Feydra, you're kind of skipping all of that, so you can get the preview of what you're actually doing before you check in your code and before it gets to any of the servers. And the biggest issue that we have dealt with when it comes to the front-enders is experience editor. Even if they know Visual Studio, even if they have everything in place, for them it's too difficult to reproduce the bugs in experience editor, because for that, you need to explain to them how Sitecore works, and you need to give them a basic content editing training, which for a front-ender is an overkill. That is the knowledge which they will use perhaps, if it's, for example, a third party, they will use on that project, and they're going to forget about it the moment they're out. And you need a developer to teach them. So then you end up with a lot of time being lost. So that is where Feydra really saves time and kicks in. So they can just have the freedom to do their own stuff, to do the bug fixes. And once they actually commit it, they can be sure that they have done the proper work, that they haven't broken something, because they're not working blindly.
Yeah, very impressive. I think front-end engineers will like this tool a lot.
Yeah, we got a very good positive feedback from several Sitecore partners, including here in the Netherlands, which are using Feydra, and it does save them time because they don't need to worry about these things.
Yeah, cool. Okay, so I think we're almost done.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for your presentations. I hope people enjoy it and learn from it. So thank you guys for your support and for collaborating me in this Sitecore User Group Ecuador.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.